I'm Karyn and I'm here with Kelly. We are answering your grief questions. And today, I think this is a really important one that people are often wondering about. But the question is, grief may not have a set timeline, but how long is too long before it's considered a prolonged grief?
Mm. Yeah, so this is a bit of a hot debate question, I think, especially in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So, for those of you that don't know, a therapist uses what's called the DSM to diagnose somebody, right? And so, if you go visit a therapist who's taking insurance, they have to give you a diagnosis. And about 2 years ago, the DSM came out with a new diagnosis, which is prolonged grief disorder. And there is a ton of controversy about this disorder. And I'm definitely on one side of the fence with this as well. And what they're doing, my issue with this diagnosis is it gave a timeline. It
Mm.
gave a time frame. Actually, it says for children, it's only 6 months, and for adults, it's a year. And Karyn, you and I have worked with grieving individuals for many years, and we know 6 months and a year is nothing in somebody's grief journey, right? Especially a child, 6 months. Come on. Like, I always think about like myself as a grieving teenager. I was 14. I would have been given this diagnosis for sure after 6 months.
Yeah.
There's not a doubt in my mind that I would
Sure.
have met that criteria because it talks about longing and yearning. And then it talks about not meeting society's expectations. Well, why does our society have expectations of what is too long to grieve, right? We tend to see this happen a lot. I mean, all of my clients will talk about, oh, somebody told me after a month, it's time to get over it.
Yeah.
But if you're asking somebody maybe who loved somebody for 25 years to just be over it in a year,
Yeah.
and it's just not accurate, and it's not okay. And I don't think we should have, first of all, I think this diagnosis is was fueled a lot by pharmaceutical companies and trying to find a medication that can fix grief.
Mm.
And there's a lot of research now going on to try to look at that, to try to find something, because right now the research shows that there is no medication that is going to help with grief,
Right.
right? Even antidepressants, there's no research to support that antidepressants help with grief.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we can say that there's a time frame and that something is considered prolonged. I think you have to look at each individual person and see how they're coping and how they're functioning. If they're 5 years out and they're still not able to get out of bed on a daily basis and they're still really struggling, that may be some complicated grief that we need to explore, and we need to look at coping mechanisms and maybe trying to look at their grief in a different way. But I don't really like to use the word prolonged. I really would have liked to have seen more of a complicated grief
Yeah.
diagnosis if we were going to have a diagnosis at all. um, but I think it's just everybody grieves so differently. Some people, they get through that first year and they're in a better place. Sometimes that second year is worse than the first year. Sometimes there's what we call delayed grief, where it doesn't come out for years later. I
Yeah.
mean, I've seen it happen with somebody 30 years later. So it happens. So I don't think we can necessarily say that there is a time frame on that. What are your thoughts,
Yeah.
Karyn?
Well, I mean, even just the fact that the word disorder is in there is not
Uh-huh.
great. I
Exactly.
mean, that's going to make people feel, pretty bad about all of that. And listen, I mean, it's worrisome. Like we're always going to, because grief already feels so abnormal and your whole life feels so changed, and even what's going on in your own head feels completely foreign. Like you don't know what this is supposed to be. And so it's scary to think that there's someone that could be saying that it's wrong somehow. And
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, this has been a big deal, I think, for people, and especially as you said, since the DSM has included it now. I sort of feel like it's just too individualized. The circumstances are too different. We have to look at, like, what was the nature of the relationship? How much of an impact did this person have on your daily life? How did the loss itself occur? What is your support system? And what are also the things that happened in your life before or are happening since
Mhm.
that are, contributing to this? It's just like not simple enough to be putting any sort of set, like, uniform timelines on at all. When people ask me about it, I'm always very honest, and it's like, well, it's so hard to say, but to me, it's more about that idea of how much is it impacting your day-to-day life. And I don't just mean, because of course it is impacting your day-to-day life, but you're almost like that ability to function. Like
Exactly.
a day in bed is okay. Several weeks in bed, that could be we, and even then I'm like, and then even then we just got to find just somebody to talk to, like it's not to say that there's anything catastrophic, like even about that, but maybe you just need a little bit more help, kind of isolating and staying away from people and not responding to texts for a little bit, also okay. But that prolonged several weeks, completely withdrawn, not spending time with people anymore, again, ignoring some household chores, things like that. There's all the things that we all have to we have to do, to kind of be functioning in our day-to-day lives. And so I think sometimes it's sort of looking at that and how well or not well that is going, you
Yeah,
know.
and I think, some of what you talked about is kind of normal in the early part of
Oh,
grief,
for
right?
sure.
First couple of weeks and months, that's pretty normal. I have a friend that she talks about after her dad died, how she had a goldfish or something, and the most she could do was get up and feed that goldfish every day.
Hmm. Yeah.
But she felt like I'm doing something. I'm
Yeah.
able to at least keep this goldfish alive, right? And but she was able to come out of that time and start to do more, right? And I think we have to look at the daily activity. What are we doing every day and how are we trying to help ourselves?
Yeah.
Um, and I think, I was just thinking about, I see a lot of kids. And so I saw a little girl 2 years ago after her parent died, and she was doing really pretty well. She did some grief groups and a grief camp, and I discharged her. But I also know with children, they tend to re-grieve at every developmental stage. So I always tell them you can always come back if something comes up. And recent little traumatic events with their home pet, so she wound up coming back to see me. And she's at a very different place in her grief now because she's older. She's able to verbalize better and talk about it more, and things that she never talked to me about 2 years ago, she's talking about now.
Mm.
And so we're doing really great work. She came back in with her journal that she completed this week. And it was great to see her do that. But it's 2 years out, so
Yeah.
now somebody, she could go to her primary care doctor, her pediatrician, and they could be like, oh, well, she's got prolonged grief disorder because she's back in grief counseling again.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's just not accurate or helpful. And I agree, that word disorder, I just hate that
Yeah.
is in
Well,
there.
and it completely like ignores the fact that again, people are going to also have other things going on. Like we'll talk about in our groups, like sometimes, people will say, I guess as a way of being like comforting, well, like life moves on. But to me, I'll say like, well, yeah, that's the hard part. Like it keeps going and there's more things that need to be done and that we need to stay on top of, and other changes and other losses perhaps, or other things that it can feel very hard for a grieving person to feel like that they can get up and stay up without being knocked down again by something else. And ultimately, if that original loss hadn't happened, probably their reactions or the way they're being impacted would be different, So it's like once that happens, it kind of impacts and touches everything, even, future events. And so yeah, it's tricky. It really is. But I guess for anybody, my thing is anybody that's ever worried about it, it's like, well, then let's talk to somebody,
Mhm.
let's talk to somebody, and maybe just a little bit more help is needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
thank
Yeah. Kelly, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll be back again with more questions answered.